Some of the content in this recording may be distressing for some audiences. There are links available for Monash Health Services in the description. I wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations, on whose land we are gathered today. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Welcome to PhD Raw, which is our inaugural podcast about student experiences. And our first guest is Freda Werdiger, who was a PhD graduate from School of Physics and Astronomy. Welcome, Freda.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
So I really want to focus on this podcast on a couple of themes around resilience and motivation. And we're going to contextualise that around your story. So I think we'll start with maybe you telling us a little bit about where you are now, and we'll go and then jump back to the start at the beginning so that the audience can understand, the landing place to start with.
Sure. So right now I'm at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. I'm a research fellow and I'm now an authority on AI in medicine. That sort of happened very slowly. So my job, day-to-day job, is to develop techniques that make use of artificial intelligence for the diagnosis and management of stroke in a hospital setting. And then outside of that, I kind of represent the future of AI within the hospital setting. So I have to facilitate the use of AI in that setting by bringing that knowledge to everybody. So I'm like the authority or the expert in AI that's sitting in the hospital. So over the next 5 years, we'll slowly integrate AI techniques into ischemic stroke care, and a lot of the work is enabling that to happen.
Can I just get you to, explain to the listeners, when you started, when you finished, and what you did for your PhD?
Sure. I started my undergraduate, I think 2006. Started my PhD at the beginning of 2011 in theoretical physics. My topic was argon plane mappings in the physical optics of complex scalar wave fields. And I finished that I graduated in December 2016.
Can you I'm going to be a smart aleck here. Right? It's like my litmus test for whether you deserve a PhD or not is, can you explain your topic in one sentence for my mum?
Not anymore, but if you give me a second. But I also won the 3-minute thesis competition, so I did manage to look for the Department for Science only, not for the whole university. Could never compete against engineering. I
That's okay.
What did I do? It's singular optics, basically. If you ever see the way light bends on the inside of a coffee mug and creates these nice shapes where light will focus and create bright spots. So in imaging systems, that's an imaging system technically. The sun shines on the mug, and the mug is an imaging system and focuses light onto the surface of the coffee to create a cool pattern. So if you take any imaging system, where light's being focused and diffracted and reflected and whatnot, that it does create singularities of light that I'm describing. And there's properties of those singularities which can create issues. And so that's where it really started from, was actually that there was an electron microscope producing these optical vortices, and it was about explaining where they came from. And that was where I started. And where I ended up finishing was the fact that lungs, when imaging lungs, it's very interesting because lungs are full of these alveoli, water sacs, air sacs, water sacs. Not if you're dying, they're water sacs, but they're air sacs, and they act as individual imaging systems focusing the light, and that creates this characteristic speckle pattern, which actually can be used efficiently in phase contrast imaging. So it can be taken advantage of, which is very interesting. So I was studying fundamentally in terms of the nature of light itself, what that is, and how to describe it mathematically. And that was what I did, was describe mathematically what this phenomenon was.
Fabulous. What a great landing spot. We'll go back to the start now, and I'm going to ask you about your time before your PhD.
Sure.
And what were you doing leading up to it, and what were your motivations to do the PhD at the start, and then we'll look into the story of your journey.
Sure. I'll go all the way back, because when I was in high school, I was very good at maths and physics. I didn't go to a school where it was very expected that I would have a career. So it was an all-girls Jewish day school, religious. Careers, sort of the role of university applications was sort of just to do with the matriculation process and to have sort of promote the academic standard of the school. So you would apply for a degree, and that would be used to promote the school. Look at, people got into here and into here, but it wasn't expected actually that I would go on to have a career, and definitely not an academic career. But I was very good at physics and maths, so I was told engineering is what I'm supposed to apply for, even though the idea of being a female engineer was hilarious. I didn't even know what it was, so I did. And then I went on to start aerospace engineering, and I just hated it so much. It was all men. I hadn't been around men ever, really, apart from my brothers and cousins. Only girl. I was so out of place. It was just terrible. But the only place I felt really happy was in the maths class, because there was no pressure for teamwork. I don't know, it was just numbers, and I just felt safe and happy. And so after a terrible semester, it was awful. And not to mention the computers. I never really sat in front of a computer. I only did touch typing. It was just awful. So I transferred to do a straight maths degree. And the physics kind of was born out of that, because I had this amazing physics teacher in high school. There were 4 girls. And actually 3 out of 4 of us went on to have careers in physics, which is crazy. But I think I got a taste for physics, and slowly physics just became the thing that I absolutely loved above anything. And I just went on and finished my degree, and then did my honours, finished my honours, and I thought, that's not it. I felt like I accomplished not much, and it didn't feel like it was enough. And I just wanted to keep going. And that was really, I honestly, just after I finished my degree and I got up on the stage to accept it, I was like, really? That's nothing. I want to do way more than that. And I just kept going. And I just didn't, I've never stopped. It's never felt like enough.
And your family, who clearly weren't promoting you to go to university, so how did they cope with your chosen pathway as a physicist?
So a lot of conflict, because I happen to be a female. But apart from that, I feel like there is a big Jewish tradition of pursuit of knowledge. My grandfather was all for careers. So it was like, if you're going to do this, you might as well do something useful. And so there was a push of like, why don't you be an engineer, be an engineer, be an engineer? At least then you can actually make some money, at least then you can have a job. So, and I definitely, no matter what, I definitely couldn't give up my responsibility to also have children. So I had to juggle both, because it was out of the question for me to drop those responsibilities that I had as a Jewish woman. But the push was very much like, this is useless. And that was definitely, there was tension there. There still is. There still is an enormous amount of tension, and my father still keeps introducing me to people. Just last week, just Friday, he had me over for dinner with somebody in a commercial imaging company, a big company, hoping that I'll work for them instead of being in a university. Right. So it's never, ever ended. But they're very proud of me. They are.
For what it's worth, my dad, for 20 years after I graduated from my PhD asked me when I was going to get a real job.
Yeah.
And only in the last 5 to 10 years is he accepted that my job is a real job. So I think this is a universal thing and a misunderstanding of, what career paths are out there if you choose to do a PhD. So, all right, we might jump into the PhD now because I know your story already. Mm-hmm. So and I'm in awe of it. But I think the audience would really, when we jump into some of the themes, your story will really contextualise some critical issues that many of our PhD students are facing now, although many of them will not have experienced your exact experience.
Okay, so the beginning of my PhD, we'll go back. So I got married right when I was finishing up my honours. And so, big Jewish wedding, 500 people, huge dress, the whole works. My family's actually Hasidic. I don't know if it means anything to you, but you'd kind of under the it'd be ultra-Orthodox Judaism is what people call it, but it's Hasidic, which means the men wear hats, the women cover their hair. So I covered my hair in a wig. It's crazy, and so I finished my honours, first class honours, and I was married and I was doing teaching, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do next? And I'm teaching at the university, and I thought, maybe I'll publish my work for my honours, because I did some interesting work for my honours, stuff that I had made up out of thin air. I effectively invented a whole field. Look, it hasn't expanded much, but it's still I came up with it, and I thought I'll publish it. And so in those conversations with my supervisor about publishing, it kind of came up what if I did want to do a PhD? And they were like, you're very welcome to, just say the word. And so that was over, it was from July to December, I was sort of umming and ahhing. And then January, I thought, let's go, let's just continue what I started, basically. Because in trying to publish the work for my honours, I kept on going, thinking of more and more ideas and more things to do. And it just was natural. Let's just go. There's funding. What else are you doing with your life? I'm like, not much. I don't have anything else to do. And so I just did it. And so I just got started with it. And then, you get married, you have children. That's just that's not even a question. And so I had my son was born in after the first year, I would say. And we can go into more details later, but it was a blur. It was horrendous. There's so many things that come into my memory. I came with him when he was 6 weeks old. I thought, oh yeah, that's ready to go back now. And I turned up with a 6-week-old baby thinking oh no, it's fine. Don't worry about me. In my wig with my baby, it's insane. Thinking don't mind me. I can do this. And there wasn't even I had to go up the goods lift because all there was the goods lift. Think about the fact that there wasn't even access for a wheelchair access. That's how I had to go all the way down to the end of the goods lift with my baby, and he just cried and cried and cried. And my supervisor's like, "What do you want me to do?" And I was like, "Just continue." And he's like, okay. So he politely just kept talking while my baby is screaming, and I will never forget people coming out of the offices, all these sort of men being like, what is that ungodly sound? And just feeling so embarrassed, just so embarrassed of my screaming baby. So that was insane. And then I guess things sort of took a downturn. They were kind of taking a downturn since I was born, I guess. But when I got pregnant again, and then, during that pregnancy, we received, a diagnosis, something's very wrong. And again, I'm telling my supervisors, look, and I remember when I told them, going into the meeting when I was going to say, this is what's happening, my supervisor said, so I hope you won't be having any more children. surely that's it for a while. And I was like, well, guess what? I'm pregnant and something's wrong. And he was like, oh, okay, well, the other supervisor said, oh, my wife, we were told something was wrong. And, everything was fine, so everything will be fine. And it wasn't fine. In the end, the baby was diagnosed with, it was fetal hydrops from Turner syndrome, which is where you don't have it's like, you only have one sex chromosome, so it's X and nothing. And for a while, I would say that the baby was phenotypically female. I couldn't even bring myself to say it was a girl. And my therapist, after a while, would said, it would have been a little girl. But I couldn't sort of humanize it. I sort of really detached from the whole experience, and I was walking around university while I was waiting for sort of diagnosis and answers like a ghost. It was incredibly traumatic. Meanwhile, my son was in care on campus in creche. I'm like driving to creche, dropping him off, and then just walking around like a ghost for weeks and weeks until, eventually I had to go ahead and just deliver this still baby. And I had to, there was just no other option. And I took time off work. I sort of had to scroll through the, my PhD contract to see like where I could take some leave. What I was eligible for. So I ended up taking sick leave under sort of, mental health needs, came back to uni. And actually I came back and I told one other PhD student that I was pregnant. And then I disappear and I come back not pregnant. And so she sort of figures what's happened. And it turns out it was so crazy that I said, well, this is what's happened. And she said, she had also had a pregnancy loss. I didn't know she was pregnant, but it just so happened that we sat down together and she had a blighted ovum, where it's like all the signs of pregnancy, but it's not turning into anything. And so she had to have a termination as well. And I just sort of kept going after that. I just sort of kept moving, but it definitely was a turning point in my life where I just couldn't keep going in this sort of dual life where I was trying to keep all the expectations of womanhood up to my family, to my husband, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I think it was just like everything just started cracking open for me, and my sort of, rage, female rage is starting to kind of come out. And it sort of spelt slowly me just like my personal revolution, I guess, where led to the breakdown of my marriage, and sort of slowly me starting to, I remember like uncovering my hair when I stopped wearing a wig, starting to change my dress, starting to wear pants. I remember those changes that I was slowly making and just emerging, all those things that I was trying to keep up. And then by the end of the PhD, I was completely transformed. I was another person. And I think that's sort of, that's the story of my PhD. That's it. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Freda. It is a difficult story to say, no doubt, but many of the listeners will be going, wow, that's a lot to take in during what is already a stressful thing, right, which is the PhD. So I want to unpack the pregnancy first, because I've had students myself who've had babies whilst doing their PhD. And one of the things about having babies, you're super tired, right? It's like it's like the joke I say to my students for having babies is like, I think you know what tired is now, but you will definitely know what tired is. So how did you pick yourself up from that in the early stages of your PhD with the baby, being tired? There's no manual. You're learning it all on the fly, right? And so, what was motivating you to come in and going up the lift and being engaged with your PhD? And what was your mindset at that time to continue?
Yeah, it's very true about the tiredness. I would say, like, when you're pregnant, it's like your bones are tired. It's really hard. And with the second pregnancy, like, that was crazy, because then I was also breastfeeding at that point. I think that's when I realized I was pregnant, because I remember sitting there being like, Sorry, I remember sitting there and thinking, there's only one thing that could make me this tired. And that's always the sign. And it's not only that, something happens to your mind as well. And I always think that it's a bit controversial to say this. People talk about baby brain and I don't want to promote the idea that a woman can't, function in the world while pregnant. But not everyone's a theoretical physicist. So I can say for myself the kind of focus and attention it takes to think that sort of level complex maths, to think about maths that way. And especially with optics, because you're visualizing quite a lot in 3D space, thinking of things really complex, three-dimensional physical realities and translating it to maths. It takes a degree of focus and attention that you cannot do when you are pregnant and there's a baby or toddler or, both of those things at once. Because your body's just like pumping oxytocin and it just, it works against what you need in order to really focus. And I found that devastating. Like it was devastating. The first 9 months of motherhood, it was like really devastating. And I remember specifically the fog lifting. I remember the problem that I was actually stuck on. It was a geometrical optics problem. And I remember when I could think and solve it. But one thing I did was I built models out of yarn. I just visualized it for myself. I had pin boards. I'd stick things in a pin and yarn and I'd sort of use the source point and that would be the yarn. And I thought if I could visualize it for myself, it could be easier. But I just got through it, and then in the end, it got better. As for the motivation, to me, what always motivated me, and still does, is, it's like do not go gently into that good night. I never want to stop. I don't want to give in to these things. I don't want to give in to the idea that I should stop because of these things. It's always pushed me because that has always been the voices saying, this isn't for you should stop. And I feel like I've kind of always been raging against that like I will stop for nothing. Definitely am not going to stop because of those things associated with womanhood, because I always feel this, I'm always raging against that. I just refuse to, which is exhausting. And I'm tired all the time. But what else can I do? It's about self-determination. This is who I am. If I was born a man, I wouldn't have to work against so much. I wouldn't be this tired. But what can I do? This is me. And that's it. And I can't change who I am. And I just keep going and I keep pushing.
Can I just touch on a couple other things related to this? So my question is really, did you ever suffer from imposter syndrome or a fear of failure around your PhD, or did you always just have the confidence to go, I'm capable and I'm going to, fight my way through all the other things in my life?
Yeah, for sure. Imposter syndrome. Oh my God. Fear of failure. Yeah. Huge fear of failure. I mean, all the time. But I always say it's counteracted with this insane psychotic ego that I have. Like I have this big belief that I have something to say and something to do. Like I have this strong belief that I am special. Like it's sort of carried with that. It's so, on one hand, I just believe that about myself. But on the other hand, it's counteracted by this shocking fear of failure. And I think with the PhD specifically, because I did feel like I was winging it a lot of the time. And I always thought, I'm not working very hard, am I? And they'll find out that I've kind of just been winging it the whole time. That was a huge theme of my PhD. Like, they're going to know I've done nothing. And so I think that was a fear the whole time of, that imposter syndrome of being discovered as a fraud. And add to the fact that I, for many reasons, didn't feel like I did belong. So that was always a paranoia. And so I remember near the end of the PhD where I finally accepted that my work is very good. And I think I might win the award. But it was a constant feeling of, like, I haven't really done much, have I? And that's sort of in my career now where I was like, I've done nothing. And they're going to realize I've done nothing. All the time.
I used to have the constant monkey on my shoulder, talking to me going, the head of school's going to knock on your door and remind you that it's time to leave because you're not good enough. And I think this imposter syndrome is very common in PhD students, and I think it's born about by you're an elite student at undergraduate and honours, and then you go into the pack. Do you know what I mean? And then you're fighting with the rest of other people. And that's pretty typical, and I think it took me a long time to get my own shit together around that as well. So, so in the zombie state you talked about when you were pregnant the second time and you're walking around school.
Wow.
Did you get much productivity at that, or was like none? Okay. So let me ask another question then. In that 2-year period, I guess it's like the first pregnancy and then the second one. What in your head? What percentage of time were you productive, and how much time did you lose in that period?
I think, I don't know what, there was like a part-time, full-time, part-time thing. So I definitely had a bit of part-time work happening. So, my PhD took 6.5 years in the end. The worst part, I think, I'm looking back, like there was a lot going on. I wanted to take a break because I knew I wasn't doing much. But that stipend, it was kind of like a toss-up between, I knew I was exhausting my stipend because I knew I wasn't productive. And so that was always a consideration. But in terms of percentage, I really couldn't say. During the zombie phase, I did nothing. There's no question about it. I did nothing. And that was 1 month. So in the scheme of things, a month isn't a very long time. But I mean, I published a paper a year, so there was that doesn't compute, does it? I think the first paper came out, and then let me think, it was like 2015. No, it was every 2 years. Yeah. So if I had, after first 2 years of PhD, one paper, and then 6, so it was like one paper every 2 years. That was 6 years. So I would say I could have done that work in half the time. I could have done it in 3 years under different circumstances, and it took me 6.5 years. Easily.
Yeah, it's still pretty amazing, by the way. When you went through your transformation, when you dropped your past and, clearly it was challenging with your relationships with family and husband, etc. How did you... Was it a deliberate thing, or was it something that kind of started and then you embraced it? And then what happened with your PhD after or during that transformation and then afterwards? What did that look like compared to previously?
It wasn't deliberate. I think it's definitely it started not deliberate, and then I think it really came from a genuine exhaustion of trying to keep everything up, and a serious unhappiness. And then I think trying to go after my own needs or my own self-determination, and I realized that it wasn't going to happen in that environment. And that I had to turn, it was like survival. I think after I lost my daughter, it became a question of survival, actually. I was like, I wouldn't survive. And that was what actually came down to. And I remember that's what it came down to. Like, I had this strong belief. I really believed this, that if I didn't change something, I would get cancer. I believed I would make myself sick somehow with everything that I was keeping in. And that it felt like a life and death situation. And that I needed to be living a life where I had like self-expression and self-determination. And then after I accepted that, it then became deliberate. I deliberately did things in order to push that, like bring it all forward. Whether it's things like uncovering my hair, or I remember once I stayed at a workshop on a Friday night, which is the Sabbath, knowing that I would drive home on Sabbath, which is something that I would never dream of that I would ever do. But I was like, I have to cross every line. And I always think it's actually sort of a unique part of the way my mind works, that part of my problem-solving skills as well. It's like, and this is part of my psychotic ego as well, you're about to hear. I believe I can see everything in a problem. Like nothing is lost on me when I'm attacking a problem. I see it all. I can see everything. And I'm no idiot. And I can't lie or pretend something isn't there. I know it's there and I have to address it. And it's like that it's just like that with everything. And so once I realized the lie of everything, I couldn't participate anymore. Not one bit. Not one bit. I had to clear everything out of my mind. And I sort of said that I have to be in a state where I can search every part of my mind and be okay with it. Like there's nothing that I'm hiding. There's nothing I'm lying to myself about. I have to sort of cleanse myself of all of this stuff. And then there was like a deliberate way that I went about, confronting everything. Which parts of my life are built on these lies? It's very harsh the way I'm saying. That's what it felt like in my head. I have to get rid of everything that it doesn't feel genuine. And it became incredibly methodical, if you will, until I felt like I was living like genuinely and living myself. It's super unique, like the way that it's very hard for me to explain, because my family would say like, you're doing it on purpose. And I was like, in a sense, yeah, I am doing it on purpose. But, this is, and then a lot of people that I know that did grow up the way I did and ended up, living a different life, still subscribe to parts of it. And the fact that I subscribe to none of it, it's like I just cleanse myself of all of it, is sort of speaks to my thoroughness in problem solving, just the way that my mind works.
And whilst that happened, what happened to the PhD? Did that thrive, or was it a slow build to momentum?
I think that it just kept going. I don't think that my work ever really changed. I think the way that I approached my work was always the same and never changed. Just sometimes I couldn't get things done. So for me, it's like either I'm in the problem or I can't do it. And I've worked like this forever, and I still work like this now, is that sometimes it just doesn't come to me, and then sometimes it just comes to me. But it's always the same. I always produce the goods in the end, but it might take a while because I'm responding pretty heavily to my environment. So sometimes emotionally, I just can't function and do the work, and sometimes I can. But when I do, the quality is the same. It's good work. It's thoughtful work. Although you can't hold by that standard forever in academia, because sometimes you have to produce a lot of shit just to get published or whatever. But I don't think, I think my work was always on a high level. I think I would have, weekly meetings with my supervisor. They were always the best part of my life. Having these like high academic conversations about maths and physics and having ideas, and like that never changed. That was like a big anchor actually with everything. Because to my supervisor, he actually didn't see any of that stuff. He just saw me, my intelligence, my ideas. He saw me, and that was all that mattered. He seems to be blind to everything else. So when I stepped into that space with him in our weekly meetings, it was like, this is what sort of my anchor. And it's always been an anchor for me as well. Until now, I reckon. Sort of grounds me a little bit.
So the person we're talking about is David, right?
Yeah.
Yep. We should be naming people. I think when they're a hero, we can name them, and if they're a villain, we can't. I think that's the rule, right? So,
yeah.
So we're talking about David Pagan.
David Pagan.
He's a legend, right?
Yeah.
And so, what sort of support did he give you during that? And we'll talk about David initially, but then we'll expand it out, and then we'll look at where do you think you needed support that wasn't provided as well. So let's start with the hero.
Yeah.
And we won't name the villain. So I might be one of the villains. I don't know. So let's talk about David and what did he do and how did it impact you, I guess?
David helped me see myself for my mind, for like my genius, my brilliance. That's what David helped me accept about myself, because I felt honestly like we were symbiotic. And so if I can be symbiotic with David, that meant I was like him. And so that helped me accept that I have a brilliant mind and I have talent. And that's been really important for me to believe that there's something in my mind that is worth sort of saving. I wouldn't have gone through all the effort that I've gone to help myself if I didn't believe that about myself. And I think that was the conversations that I had with him. It went so far beyond just the science. We would talk film, music. I mean, we just had a rhythm that I really felt like I'm on the level of, like, we're on each other's level in terms of how fast our minds are and the connections and the inspirations that we draw from the world around us. Like, we can draw inspiration from our physics, from, Beethoven. We're just picking up things. Yeah, and that's what he really gave me, was like self-acceptance. And he would say to me, you have talent, and it's like, it means something to hear that from someone that you look up to. And his voice really encourages me even now.
So it's really interesting that style of supervision, right? It's quite rare. I think academics in general are very good at putting the red lights up, going, no, don't do it this way, don't do it that way. And then in the background, in your mind, for many students, it becomes about, every bit of feedback becomes a red light. Do you know what I mean? But when a supervisor gives you a green light and says you are belonging here, what you're doing is great, then your mindset can shift completely. And I think there's a lot to be learnt around. I actually think the psychology of sports is very similar to the psychology of supervision. It's like, if you encourage someone, they'll always do better than if you're constantly slapping them down and putting them down and putting that red light up. And it's, in some ways it's like sports people figured this out 25 years ago. Do you know what I mean? And academics are still trying to deal with it. So, and I think we're getting better at it, but the red pen is like, sends a pretty brutal message at times. So.
If there was more money in academia, maybe they would be more motivated to get better things out of people.
Yeah.
Using actual psychology.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Your needs whilst pregnant and the difficulties afterwards. How did the school help? Were they helpful, or were they kind of a bit lost because it became too challenging?
First mention that I was pregnant from the person that was very senior. I was heavily pregnant, and he said, "Wow, you're big." That was pretty much it, and I never even mentioned it. Like, I just was like, "This isn't happening." That was sort of it. Like, I didn't even mention it. I just completely repressed. I just repressed it all. Like, I just pretended it wasn't happening. Like, not to myself, but just didn't want to appear to be needing any more than anybody else. And I didn't want anybody to think that I wasn't going to succeed. So I just didn't mention it. And even when my son was born, I was very much like, just don't mention it. And so that's basically that. Yeah. It only was a needs must. If I needed something, it was because I was really desperate that I had to ask for help. So.
And was it supportive when you asked? Like, so did when you needed the leave, and did they find innovative ways to use the system to do it, or was it just too hard?
No. That was all me. No, I think I had maternity leave that I had 6 weeks, but it was very much like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I have no idea. What? Like, I need some ideas from somebody else. I had no clue. So I had to make it up myself. And I was wrong about all of it. Like, you have to be home for 6 months after you have a baby. Sorry, just bloody enjoy it, for God's sake. Like, it happens like that. Also, having your first baby, just stay still. I went back to work immediately, and it was just a horror show. But I think there was not really any other voice giving me advice. Like, hey, don't worry about all this. Like, we'll be here. I didn't know it was going to take me 6 years anyway. If I had known that, I wouldn't have been such a hurry to get back, because I wasn't productive anyway. There wasn't another voice saying, this will be here when you get back. Don't worry about it. They just said, what do you want to do? And I just said that. Nothing, I'll just work. So, and nobody contradicted me. So it was that's a mistake. Don't do that.
And do you think that's a lack of female role models in science? So it's like a corridor of men, and then suddenly you're in this situation. It's like there's no one really here to sit you down and go, the 6 months break will be way better than battling the PhD and the being a new mum.
Holy moly. Yeah. No females, but also the women that are there. Firstly, people leave after they have a baby. It's almost like your time is up. Your end sort of becomes near once the babies come. And the women around me that were representing women in physics, they weren't there anymore after they started to have kids. So there's that really, it's like that how do you say, I'm on borrowed time? It's sort of this feeling that I'm on borrowed time as soon as you start to be pregnant. And so I just wanted to show that that wasn't the case. But the women that are there tend to compete with one another about like, I completed a grant in the hospital bed, And I just heard that a couple months ago. It was like, Women in Science Day or blah, blah, blah. And they had some women on the ABC on Radio National. And that was that was like, tell us about it. And it was like this competition as to who, stories like that. I don't know what it is, but it's like, it's like work above all else, and so that's the role models. That's what's there. It's like people that deny the work that it is and pretend it isn't there, which is what I was trying to emulate. Like, I'm going to do this and nothing's going to stop me, or people that leave. There is no room to actually have family life that's actually witnessed by the people around you. There was no example of that. So it was almost like if you show that vulnerability, then you're on borrowed time. And so you have to mask it. And that's what I was trying to keep up, I think. That's what I was emulating, that kind of woman. Like, that was the role model, the only one that I could really grab from is a woman who acts like basically like a man, without the family responsibility and doesn't mention and pretends it isn't happening. That was really all I had to compare myself to, that or quit.
Yeah, not tangible options, really, are they? So, yeah.
Suck.
Yeah. So look, if I had to judge you out of resilience, like put you on a scale, I would say 50 out of 10, right? It's like, for me, it is a story of resilience and perseverance. I want to understand how you were feeling in that moment. It's like, how resilient did you really feel during your PhD journey? And then if you had to judge yourself then and then judge yourself now, what are the differences?
So exactly. So now I'll tell you that I'm so healthy right now in so many levels. But in order for me to emulate what I'm describing as this sort of woman that does it all and doesn't, show those sort of other needs, it was really, my mental health was like terrible, and it was very self-destructive. It was like I was sort of being devoured from within. And the memories I have, I really shudder, just how poor my self-care was. Even worse than that. Like there are coping mechanisms that I had that were not healthy at all. I think about that and I cringe because I never want to be back there. The shame as well, and just, wanting to, I think that I've always had this feeling of just sort of wanting to like completely disappear into smoke. Like the solution is to just not exist, or to take up a small amount of space as possible. And that has, manifested itself in several ways. And one of those ways, a theme was eating disorders, was literally trying to disappear myself. Like if I didn't exist, and that was the solution, because it always felt like, I'm a walking contradiction. Like I'm just a problem. I exist as a dichotomy, and I just have to just devour myself, and then that's the solution. And that was sort of where I was existing. And compared to now, like right now, I just exist, and I don't compromise anything. Like I do not want to perform my womanhood the way anybody wants me to. I don't want to cover up my mothering, nurturing side either. I will do whatever I feel like, and none of that should contradict each other. Like, I should be able to do whatever I want in terms of have the career I want and be present where I want in academia, and still be the kind of mother I want and be the kind of person that I want. And that's how I exist now. And like, my well-being has never been better. I take care of myself. I feel so good about myself. I don't have self-hatred the way I used to have real self-hatred. And that reflects a lot in the values that I have and the way that I take care of myself. And I feel like I'm not expressing that so well, so maybe you can like prompt me a little bit. But that's the big difference between then and now, is I actually don't hate myself. And then I really hated myself a lot. So I think that's sort of the difference, really.
And you talk about self-care, right? So what do you do now that's, from a behavioural perspective? And the reason I'm asking is, if someone's going through a period of where they're doubting and, they've got use the word self-hate, but it's like a low self-esteem really, isn't it? So, what can they do, in that moment that you have learnt? So what, in hindsight, do you know what I mean? So what do you bring, what can that person think about to change the way they view themselves?
I think it comes from a place of accepting that you're a person, you are who you are, and you're a human, and you're allowed to be a human. And I'm not a performing monkey. And so if I'm having a period of time, which I happen to be going through actually a big personal challenge right now, that is emotionally draining me, just family stuff. And I say, well, this is all I can give. This is what I can give my job right now. Does that mean I should quit? I've actually had times where I felt like I wasn't delivering because my emotional state is what it is. I called up HR. I was like, what am I supposed to do in this circumstance? Quit? Resign? Sorry, I can't perform up to this standard. Or what responsibility is it on the school that you're in to support you? Because, all you can... So I've had that conversation with HR, like, where does responsibility lie? And right now I'm having a bit of a difficult time, and I just present myself and say, well, this is what I'm going through, and this is all I can give my job, and all I can do is my best. And my supervisor, I'm honest with my supervisor, my boss. This is where I'm at. I'm having a certain emotional state, which means I'm less productive. Boo hoo. I mean, you're very welcome to fire me, but no one's going to do that. You just have to do the best you can and not gut yourself, in order to keep delivering. And that's like on an emotional level how I take care of myself. This is what I've got. This is what I can come to work with. And sometimes I leave work early, and sometimes I come to work late. Big deal. Like, at the end of the day, I think in academia, your progress is sort of measured month by month, year by year. And so if some of those months you're here and some of those months you're there, that's okay. And I think as much as possible, you should make that visible. Just set an example to be a human being, like that it's okay, and to be transparent. And so that's how I take care of myself the best way. And then in the ways that I practically take care of myself, I think exercise is very important. And my bosses support that too. Like, exercise regimens are very important to my boss. So, they know I work from home on Fridays because I have Pilates. I go to my physio. And they know on Tuesdays I work from home because I have my therapist. And they know I'm taking care of my emotional state because they know I get overwhelmed and that affects my work. And their question to me is like, what are you doing to support yourself? Well, I go to therapy on Tuesdays and I work from home. I go to Pilates on Friday. I take care of my body. My body is strong. My mind is strong. I'm open and transparent about that. And I think that transparency means the rope that you have to throw for help is so much shorter. If you hide all of that when you're in crisis, you're like, what is the length of rope that I need to actually get some help? I think the more that I'm open, the easier it is when things are bad to say, oh, by the way, this is going on. And we already have a language between us. And so that conversation is much easier to have. And that's how I'm managing things now.
So the honesty with your boss is not unique, but also not always there for everyone who works in academia and actually the real world. Do you think that honesty has allowed your colleagues, etc., to be more empathetic to your requirements and therefore a greater understanding, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it always feels like there's this fine line, but I don't even know if this line is there. Well, we feel like we reveal too much, we're seen as complainers or making excuses. And so you want to have a fine line between not appearing complaining. But I started to be convinced more and more that there isn't really a line, and that's just sort of a narrative. I didn't even know that line really exists, but I think, sometimes you get really paranoid about, especially as a woman, because we have these reasons for being on leave a lot. And there's a lot of bad press around being on leave and taking too much from the system. And that drives you to sometimes be quiet and not say anything. So it can work against you. One time I did say I have to leave the meeting because I have to pick up my son from school, and for some reason it didn't land. Like they didn't like it. I don't know why, but sometimes everybody says, I have to go to school pickup. So I don't know. Sometimes you just have to take the temperature of what you reveal and what you don't reveal. But I think on the whole, that I'm just open and that it does help. It does help.
Yeah, my experience around that whole school job, that was my job, right? So
Yeah.
Because my wife's the primary income earner in our household. And so that, mornings, etc. And I once was told that I had to be at a meeting at 8:30 and I went, I can't do this. I just can't be there at that time. And so I in the meeting I raised it and I got a really positive response, really interesting from a senior manager. And 4 females came up to me afterwards and said, thank you, I have the same problem, and I felt like I wasn't going to be heard if I raised it. So it was a real insightful moment for me, I am treated differently to other people, so other females in particular. So, so I actually applaud the honesty. I love it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think if you're authentic and honest with people, they do have a stronger empathy to your circumstance, and then I don't want to use the word cut slack because that's not the right word, but it's like they will accommodate your needs, knowing how brilliant you are and how productive you are for your organisation.
Yeah. But also it's like, who cares? At the end of the day, it's like, you are who you are. Like, I think we were talking about this before the recording. It's so exhausting hiding stuff after a while. Not hiding, but keeping all that to yourself. And it's just easier to be like, this is what I'm doing. And it's like, so what, Like, so what? Like, what's the big threat to just be truthful about your life and to just exist? I think that that's, to me, that's kind of the answer of like progress and having women be more represented, is to stop acting like there's like to stop treating it like it's such a big deal, because they're just normal. It's just so normal. And so what's really going to happen? Like, again, are you going to fire me? Because I'm like, no. So then whatever. I think that's also the thing. It's just this is what it is. It's normal stuff. It's normal stuff. Like, so many people have children. It's a really normal thing. It's just normal. And it's more effort after a while to just not be honest about it. And then I kind of want to see people, the people that aren't sharing that, like the people that don't have responsibilities of family, being the ones that feel weird and different and out of it, because it turns out, so many people do. And now that we all start to talk about it, it's like the people that are self-conscious are the people with no family responsibilities. That's what I want to see. Just make it easy for people, and then we don't have to pretend like that we have to deliver to the same amount that somebody that doesn't have family responsibilities are. I don't want to have that pressure. I'm never going to live up to that, by the way. If I'm expected to deliver the same as a colleague who's my age, male, not married, not have children, then I'll fail on every count. So whatever. Like I'm making my own standard. This is a new standard. And that's the standard that has to exist if I'm going to be here. And I'm going to be here. So whatever.
I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I really do. So I just want to, I could talk for hours with you about all of this,
Me
but
too.
I do want to talk about your family and
Yes.
their level. Like your dad clearly cares about your career, right? Because he's offering free careers advice to you, and clearly you're engaged with them.
Yes.
So despite your transformation
Yes.
and moving away from your orthodoxy, I don't know whether that's the right word, but how long before they embraced the new Freda?
Oh, I don't know, that any minute now. Do you know what's really funny is that I've done like videos with the School of Physics, like promotional stuff, and I like because you can actually see the changes. The first one I'm wearing very modest and in a wig. The second one I was wearing a scarf instead because I decided to go with a headscarf instead of a wig. And then by the time I got the Robert Street doctoral prize, my hair was cut off short. It was just hilarious because you can actually track my whole development. It's hilarious. I think I've applied the same thing with my family that I have with my career. I'm here, deal with it. That's it. It's like I'm not going anywhere. I actually can't go anywhere because I've got my son to take care of, and he has his dad who is in the Jewish community as well. So I don't have the option of just getting the hell out of Dodge. They have to deal with me. And I think in the majority of cases, for Hasidic families or ultra-Orthodox families, when a child does become wayward, they just deal with it. Like, you hear stories of people rejecting, and there is some difficulty. I mean, there is a lot of trauma with respect to rejecting that, because it's not easy, and it's not easy to accept for sure. And I'll remind you, like the Melbourne community, like that Hasidic community, all just transplanted from Russia because of the Holocaust. That's where these people are coming from. Like, this is Jewish life was annihilated in Europe. We all ended up in Melbourne trying to recreate it, and your job is to sort of have children and make it happen again. And that's how I was raised. Like, that's my job is, and there isn't any idea of self-determination, and it feels like this survival thing. That if you turn your back on that, you're turning your back on the 6 million. Like, that's the burden. I can't even describe the burden on your shoulders growing up as a third-generation Holocaust survivor, where our parents just, like, multiplied. That was it. The 70s, they were like, children, children, children. Everybody that I grew up with, 7 children, 8, 9, 10 children, 13 in a family, because that was it. And that was the pressure. So for me to be like, no thanks, it was like you're turning your back on 2,000 years of tradition.
But when you turned your back on that tradition and went against all the expectations, I shouldn't be smiling at this because it's actually. I want to loop it back to the PhD, right? So that was towards the end of your PhD. So you're going through this sort of family transformation.
Yeah.
Did that affect your PhD at all, or you kind of were partitioning things into different parts of your life? And
yeah, it definitely did. It's funny because it was definitely, I started to have like theological thoughts as well around all of this stuff as well. And early on in my degree, it was very confronting to enter into a science world that was really very at odds with how I was raised. And so my thoughts and ideas sort of starting to kind of proliferate. And so they definitely were all very, very much connected. So yeah, it definitely did affect things a bit. And I kind of sort of started to feel like my skin all very uncomfortable, and then slowly started to feel a bit more comfortable. But yeah, of course it's going to affect my PhD. And I have like I think actually it was positive because I started to feel I could be myself. Because I always felt like really uncomfortable in my skin. And then the more I started to shed my skin in a sort of figurative sense, literally shedding my wig, shedding my clothes in a sense, I started to feel like I could connect more with the people around me. I didn't feel so different and alien, even though they might not have been aware of the ways that I was different, but I was very much kept to myself. Only once I was sort of getting the divorce, kind of starting to feel more like myself, did I feel like I could actually connect with other people around me and really embrace openly and comfortably the parts of myself that I feel most comfortable and that I can love, and that actually made me make more friends than I did before. And so I really started to connect into the community more because I felt like more at home. And I think ultimately helped me find my place in the academic sphere, which I ended up sort of permanently taking up. And so I think it was overall like a very positive change, being able to open up to people more.
Yeah, it's a great response.
Mm.
Do have to ask a question, and I probably should have asked it 15, 20 minutes ago, so I'm looping back into something, might be some splicing or something like that. So your supervisor was great at the support that you needed. How did the university go? Like overall, do you know what I mean? Did we do anything good, or did we just kind of we weren't equipped to cope with your circumstances?
It was all bric-a-brac. So the first thing was that I had pelvic instability when I was pregnant with my son. And that changed. There's like ergonomic issues. The first one being the bloody car park there. And they sort of took all the space from the bottom was no longer blue permits. And then more and more, not even than the level 1. It was like, so you had to get there really early in order to get something that wasn't, level 4. And then that became a real sort of struggle. And then eventually it was like I could no longer walk up and down these steps. And so that was like the first thing where I had to call up and just see what I could do. In the end, they gave me a yellow permit to park wherever I wanted. That's the contractor's park. So it's the closest one. And it was up on my due date because I'm not allowed to work on the due date. Like, it was something hilarious like that. So it was like, time's up. Hand it over. Like, okay. And they were so excited about that. And actually, this is a really classic. The guy who got me the yellow permit was so chuffed with himself because he got like a commendation for like his efforts to support a pregnant woman. And he said, it's given me a bit of a, like, he was able to show off and he got a special, like, something hilarious. I was like, I'm glad I could facilitate your career rising. And that was the first thing. Then the one thing I remember was I had to come in for whether it was my transfer exam. So it was at the end of, no, the transfer exam would have been before my son was born. One of those sort of mid-candidature reviews maybe.
A milestone, yep.
Yeah, milestone. And I was like, can I go first? Even though there was an order, like, can I go? No, it was like, I'll go first and then everybody has to leave and they'll do review and interrupt the session basically. Instead of doing everyone's talk, then they do the review, then they bring you in. It was like, no, Freda's going first and then we all have to leave so that they can confer and then I go in for my review. And I brought my baby to campus. It was almost like, why did I don't know, like, it's crazy that I brought him in. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. I brought my baby in. A friend watched him on campus. I ran and did my talk. They excused everyone for the review, did their review, called me in. And so they accommodated me. And the head of the school was like, I just want to say that I applaud you. I was like, what? And they were like, I applaud you. I was like, really? I just felt like I was the biggest mess. Like I was a mess, just this like crazed, dripping milk like woman and barely holding it together. And in the end, they were like, you're amazing. I was like, that's insane. Like I had little moments like that. It was all little things. But there was really, every time I brought him in, which I had to do sometimes because mothers tend to be attached to their babies. I don't know if you heard. We come together as we should. And that was always just horrible because they moved everyone to the open plan office. Started my PhD in my own office with this other PhD student, and we were very happy. We never said a word to each other, which was perfect for us. We got along great. My never talking, it was heaven. Then we got moved into this open plan office, which was hellscape. There was no quiet area. There was the tea room and conference rooms, and everyone was in the open. So if I brought my son in and it echoed every sound, it was just like, ah. It's so awful. Like if he just was even eating a cracker, it was just awful. It was like really bad. So sometimes I just left him outside and said, could someone just watch him? And then I go in and do what I need to do really quickly because God forbid. And then I go out there and they're sort of awkwardly standing around my baby, not talking to him, not, just like watching him. All his, it was so bad. It was just terrible. I just felt like, oh man, I can't even, it was so bad. Not to mention if I did manage to leave him at home with care, and then I'd always be rushing home because he always refused. He would wait for me because he only wanted from the breast. Even if I expressed milk, which I did diligently every day in the toilets right there, because we're right now in the same building I did my PhD, and the bathroom right behind us was the bathroom that I would sit in the stall and express milk. I would put it in a little bag, hide it in the back of the physics tea room fridge. I'd still have to race home because he was screaming and crying. So it was like the worst experience of my life. It was just terrible. It was really, really bad. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And now we can work from home these days. I feel like it'd be so much better.
Yeah, the flexibility is much better, I think, too. So,
It's bad. No, school did nothing. But I also asked for nothing. So there's that.
So do you think you should have reached out more at the time and that would have been better for you?
Yeah. But, in order to do that, I would have had to drop a lot of shame and guilt. And that wasn't going to happen. So, yeah, I would act very differently now, but I'm older and wiser now and more confident and more secure in my place in the world. Whereas then it really felt fragile. So it was like if I cough or flinch, this will all disappear. So I just didn't have the emotional tools, I think, to really ask for help. If there was support in form of a group, a peer group, that would have been better. That would have been good.
Yeah, really interesting. I don't think there's such a thing still, so I don't know, right?
No.
So I might make a mental note for the team over there too. we I don't start winding it up, but so I guess I'm really curious about, uber confident Freda today and comfortable in yourself. What advice would Freda today give to Freda day one, year 1, year 2, year 3 of your PhD? What's the advice? You know what I mean?
I just think of her and I'm like, poor thing. Just was so stressed all the time. And I don't know what could, I think about what could have helped me, because a lot of that was just my age. You're just young and ill-equipped. And so even if somebody had given me advice, I wouldn't have, you wouldn't have taken it anyway. But I think, just the knowledge that the path I was on is the path I was going to stay on for my whole life. You're doing the right thing. This is good. You do belong. Keep it up. I think that's just that. No, this is good. And also by virtue of the fact that I wanted to be there, that's actually enough. You want this? Go for it. There's actually no reason that you shouldn't be excluded from this on any basis. And that's really it. If you want to be here, then you can be here. And of course, you definitely have enough brains and talent to do it. So just keep going. I think that's it. Just that's what I would have wanted to hear. Because the struggles, they just were what they were. That was just my path to maturity. I don't regret. I'm happy that I had my son young at that time in my life. That's great. And now he's like almost 11. And so I definitely would love to see, I don't want people to push off having children because they think that their career can't adapt to it. If you want to push off children because you don't feel like you're ready for personal reasons, sure. But if it's purely because you think, oh, a PhD is not a good time, this and that, I would like to see people doing whatever they want. And, like when you're in your 20s, like it's a pretty good time to have children because you're kind of really strong and fit. And it's a good time. So, I think what I could have done with was just that confidence that I'm not crazy and that it's all possible. And I think that's kind of what I try to tell people. It's all good. You're not crazy.
And what do you say to a student who's, hitting towards the end of candidature and there's still a little way to go? What advice do you give a student like that?
The PhD is a good time because you don't have the pressure to, when you're in your career, you have the pressure of money, having to bring money in and all that kind of thing. And so there's something amazing about your PhD time where you've got the funding and it's just all about your project. And so I think that I would just remind them that it's quite a special time in a career. I wouldn't tell that to just anybody because I'm aware that it's not for everybody. But if I felt like that person was like, no, this is good, you belong here, this is great, I think it's just to remind that the PhD is it's a great time in your career and to enjoy it because you don't have all of that pressure that comes along after. And I think it's just about encouragement that a big part of it is the feeling like you're not doing enough fast. I want to remind people that in academia, things take ages and don't worry about it. Things do take a long time. Progress is slow. There is not one ruler to measure your progress. That's arbitrary. Whether you feel like you're fast or slow is really subjective and arbitrary. So I would encourage students to sort of wash away all those fears and anxieties about progress. It just takes ages, and to enjoy it as much as possible. Because even though it was so hard for me, and I still look back on it fondly. I still look back on it like it was such a good time in my life. It really, really was. I was working on stuff that I really, really found interesting. I loved it. So my thoughts are always fond about my PhD. And that is a resilient thing. I don't want to be cynical about PhD like a lot of people are cynical. But to me, it's amazing. It's an amazing time.
That is an awesome answer, by the way. Just one quick thing about the transformation, because you've started off as a theoretical physicist, and now you're doing something very different.
Yeah.
What are the skill sets that you kind of took from your PhD that allowed you to land in the the medical imaging space?
Yeah, great question. So, images. Images are, little squares, and each of the squares has a value. If it's an image, it's a pixel. and if it's a 3D image, those become voxels. These is all semantics in my mind because I come from field theory, and fields are things that cover every point of space. And any given time, we're in many fields. I'm under a light source now, and that's a field. But I'm also receiving, we're trying to block it out, but the sun is a source of light, and we're in that field too. We're also in electromagnetic fields because it's recording things and signals and whatnot. And also, of course, our phones are receiving signals and giving signals. And you cut up space into small areas, infinitesimally small. Now I can say that word after like a decade. Infinitesimally small areas that you evaluate the field. Call it a voxel, call it a pixel, it's all the same. It's basically a mathematical expression of like something that you have to describe for an equation. And when you are working in field theory, you basically cut space into planes, and we simulate those with computers. We simulate a field, and we display it as I'm doing a lot of hand waving here because when you're a theoretical physicist, unfortunately, all you have is hands to wave. We haven't got any equipment, but that's basic. It's the same thing. Fundamentally, we choose a 2D plane to evaluate the field over. That is what an image is. It receives light. The detector, let's say it's a flat panel, is broken up into voxels, receives the light, boom. It's the same thing. And I think that I realized I could do this pretty quickly. And then when I finished my PhD, oh my God, I had no money, none. I just needed a job, any job. And I'm downstairs in this New Horizons building, and on level 3, they needed someone to analyze all the data. And this is coming into the time where, image acquisition technology is booming. All these scientists are trigger happy and just collecting data, and nobody can analyze it because imaging as data was still something that really wasn't, not a lot of people knew how to do that. And I just turned up at the right time. Oh, I can do this, no problem. And then it was like the same, the synchrotron, all this equipment coming in the synchrotron, all these, scientists researching things, acquiring high-tech images, high resolution. Nobody knows how to analyze it. So I was able to move into that space really easily. And then once I was in that space, it was like, oh, this is data science. Oh, this is data engineering. And then I was like, this is AI. Suddenly, all of a sudden, I realized what I was doing was machine learning or AI, whatever the hell it was. And I remember like sitting there with Kay Morgan from physics, and I was like, we just rebranded. We wrote, oh, this is unsupervised machine learning, isn't it? Like, yeah. It's a clustering algorithm, and we were like pretty chuffed. The space just suddenly became image analysis, data analysis. Suddenly it was all about AI. And I've always just adapted, and it was like once I was in medical imaging, and then I was imaging the lungs, I thought, maybe I can do the brain too. If I can do the lungs, I can do the brain again. It's all the same to me. It's all the same to me. It's materials, it's light, it's a field, it's a voxel. And so then, I just, introduced myself to the head, Andrew Bivard, actually through a mutual friend, met him for coffee. I just was like, I can do all of it. I didn't really know what they were doing, but I just was like, I can probably do it. And he just hired me. I sat down with them, and I just charmed the pants off of everybody in that group. They hired me quickly, and I just was like, what am I going to do in this space? And then it's been 3 years now. It's been hard. I had to teach myself quite a lot, teach myself everything I know about machine learning and AI. And a lot of my programming, my coding, I had to teach myself too. But I got there in the end. And I kind of have this thing where I just don't let anybody know that I can't do things, ever. Never talked myself down like that, ever. I just a thing that I do. I walked in there as a physicist, and they go, oh, you're very smart. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. Yeah, I just turn up like I know what I'm doing, and then secretly figure out what I'm doing. And like after, and just I stayed the course, and it's been like 3 years, and now I'm like, it's going really well. Now I just had got my 4th paper almost for the year 2023 to be accepted. So it's taken a lot of self-learning, and now it's like brain imaging. It's like my wheelhouse all of a sudden. Stroke, I don't know.
I was going to ask you about the papers, because I saw it on Twitter actually, and I was like, oh, was it Freda? Do you know what I mean? And then I was like, don't ask, because it might have been someone else, but like 3 in a week or something like that.
Yeah, something crazy.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's awesome. I'm gonna wind it up. I want to thank you for being so honest and authentic in this interview. It's I think your story is amazing and confronting at the same time. And I'm hoping that, when the students or whoever listens to the podcast, they can take your story and unpack bits of it related to, not many people have your experience, but the bits, the resilience and how you tackled your challenges. There's some real lessons in for everyone. So thank you for sharing. I know you're a pretty open book, and that's why I really appreciate it. One last fun question. What was the album or the streaming service that was on high rotation during that PhD?
Thinking about this actually, because there was no Spotify, and I was trying to remember, and I'll tell you. Okay, the end of the PhD. Do you know what song was on repeat? This is crazy. There were 2 that come to my mind. It was "Paranoid" by Black Sabbath, and it was Chopin's Ballad No. 1. I don't know if you've heard this song. No. So a lot of rage. I was raging. Those two songs are just full of rage. I don't know if you ever listened to the Ballad No. 1 from start to finish. If you weren't angry before, by the end you're just raging. So I think that I pushed through the end of my PhD with just pure rage, which I think is really undervalued as an emotion, especially in a woman. So yeah.
I wasn't expecting that answer. It was like old school and then really old school.
Really old school. I'm always like that. My music doesn't make any sense. I'll be listening to like Renaissance music 1 minute, and then I'll be listening to, I love techno as well. Love it. I don't really have a pattern. It's just like whatever sparks up in my brain, I'll be like, oh, because I think it's more like whatever. Those 2 things are similar in a sense, because metal is about emotion, raw emotion. And the romantic period of classical music is also about emotion. Whereas before, the classical period, it was all about, melodies that evoke God, nature, sort of lofty ideals that humans want to aspire to. When the romantics came in, Beethoven was just like, ah! And the same thing, it's just emotion, which was totally new. And it's Black Sabbath is exactly the same. It's raw emotion. So I think that was my vibe at the end of the PhD. That's what got me through. It was actually just unbridled rage.
Wow. That's not the answer I was expecting. So
yep.
That question might be hard to top going forward. So thanks, Freda. That was great. Really appreciate that you've taken some time off work to come in and share your story. So thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of PhD Raw. We hope you enjoy the insights and valuable advice shared by our distinguished alumni. Their PhD experiences shed light on the diverse and transformational journeys that shape the lives of doctoral students. As you navigate your own academic path, remember to embrace the challenges, celebrate your accomplishments, and value the connections you make along the way. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and making an impact in your field.